Hello there. Erwin Olaf is an art superstar in Europe and especially in his own country, the Netherlands. His narrative style of photography has a lot in common with the work of American photographers like Jeff Wall and Gregory Crewdson. He meticulously stages his images in order to produce photographic fantasies that challenge social taboos and explore human frailty. His work, and especially his lighting, is deeply rooted in the visual traditions of Dutch art. But he manages to bridge the gap between historical and contemporary picture making. There are hints within his work of artists like Rembrandt, all the way through to Mapplethorpe. His creations also incorporate a feeling of nostalgia, borrowed from the American artists like Edward Hopper and Norman Rockwell. But he manages to infuse the images with a David Lynch style of darkness and otherworldliness. Apart from appreciating the beauty and mystery of his work, there's also something more practical that we can learn from him. All of his images have a very recognizable style, but within that he manages to create distinctive sub-themes that give a structure to his overall body of work. Creating definable essays is a really valuable tool for photographers, because if they're interested in developing a conversation with an audience or with the gallery art world, this kind of structure allows viewers to engage and delve into a bite-sized chunk of one's work. And then that becomes a gateway to engaging with your overall production. Because as a photographer, you are often so intertwined with your work, and it's really common to believe that viewers should just understand what you are doing. But very few people take the time to really think about what the photographs are saying. They don't spend enough time to look at your whole body of work. So if you allow them access, then they can start to see your broader aims and motivations. They can then build an understanding of how your work fits together into a cohesive and meaningful whole. Creating structure is also a very useful exercise to develop for yourself. So instead of just randomly moving from one subject to the next, try to develop an overall purpose, and then your practice of photography can also become a lot more meaningful for you. Work gains complexity by increasing the hyperlinks between individual images and between your essays.
Hey man,
I'm a guy who likes to work on my car.
I'm going to delve into Olaf's work, but it'll be useful to keep track of how he has curated and composed his grand opera of images. He started his career as a photojournalist documenting the gay scene in the 1980s. But he realized that in order to achieve the results that he wanted, he needed to dramatically alter his practice. He shifted his role from being a documenter to becoming a director. He started to stage all the facets of the photograph. He mixes reality with fantasy in order to reflect what he visualizes in his imagination. And the results are haunting, beautiful, and in a way very unsettling. These photographs are not the result of a Saturday afternoon dress-up session in his garage. They are massive productions requiring a sizable crew. He's a real perfectionist, and he's exacting about composition, about lighting, as well as the performance of his actors.
1, 2, pak die klotsen. 1, 2, 3. Oké, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
I'm going to initially look at his trilogy. They were called Rain, Hope and Grief. And these were made in the early 2000s, and Olaf's emotional state became the focus for his fantasies. If you just came across, say, a mix of these images, you would still recognize that they were Olaf's. But as distinct essays, you can recognize how he's defined each body of work by look and feel, but also more decisively by mood and feeling. That's not an easy thing to do. One needs to really wrestle with each setup to first of all get the external factors in place. And then as a director, he needs to extract that magic moment. These three essays highlight the suspended moment when an emotional reaction is caught in the holding position. There's a stillness as well as a presence of strong emotions and even neurosis. Olaf describes this trilogy as a self-portrait. He says that the first essay, Rain, mirrors what an aggressive man he was between the ages of 20 and 30. He describes himself then as vicious and angry with the world. There's a very distinctive Norman Rockwell feel to these images. Within this series, one gets a feeling that his sitters are in a suspended place, as if they are waiting for movement to happen. It could be that they've just experienced a moment of happiness. They've been jolted out of the movie-like flow of life, and they are feeling like they are in limbo. One could look at it like the movie Matrix, when Keanu Reeves knows that he's been living in a dream state, but reality is still awkward and he's unsure of what to do next. The series Hope captures a moment of expectation and longing. And as a viewer, you are invited to guess the circumstances that led up to this moment, but also what the subject is thinking. These scenes are far more Edward Hopper than they are Rockwell. His subjects are not connecting or relating to each other. They are caught up in their own complex thoughts. There's a silence that fills the space, but it isn't peaceful. They are fraught with tension and repressed emotions. He's using the actors' expressions and their body language in order to communicate emotions like desire, regret, or hope. His subjects are superficially perfect. Their clothing, their hair, their makeup, it's all flawless. And we are lulled into the idea that we are looking at an illustration in Vogue magazine. But they are filled with a pressure cooker type of intensity that is about to explode. This photograph of a brunette with a yellow ribbon in her hair, I think it perfectly illustrates Olaf's work. The formal composition, the painterly feel, the model is perfectly styled as if for a fashion shoot, but there's confusion around why it's such a fraught moment. She seems to have just halted in the doorway of a hotel room. She's touching her neck with one hand, and there's a questioning expression on her face. We don't know whether she's just escaped an argument or she's hesitating before entering. In Grief, there's a change of styling. After Hope and Rain, he was finished with the Norman Rockwell look. But he still felt that the story had to develop further. He began to research recent American history and photography, and he was moved by images of the early 1960s depicting John Kennedy and his wife Jackie. The theme of grief grew out of this sense of hope dashed by the assassination. Olaf's previous aggression had now shifted to sorrow. He's very aware of his color palette. This series is almost a study in beige. It's probably the least emotive color, and for someone who wants to communicate emotion, it might seem to be a strange choice. But the blandness adds a quality of sadness, entrapment, and possibly repression. Perhaps it reminded him of the early 60s decor and how the monotony of suburban life left one feeling isolated. So from this trilogy, you get an idea of how tightly Olaf is controlling all aspects of his work. He's continually experimenting while maintaining an aesthetic consistency. This makes viewers want to see more. They want to understand how the story develops. He doesn't confine himself to portraying his inner world. In a series called Berlin, he expands outwards and he starts to question what kind of world is he living in. He says that he saw political clouds coming towards Europe and wanted to find a way of communicating this. The action within these images is often dominated by children. He had noticed that over the past 30 years, European children have been given more authority. The parents have handed over power to children, and their innocence is in a way becoming perverted by their unrestrained egos. He developed this idea and blended it with the look and feel of the historical Weimar Germany, which was between 1919 and 1933. This is the period that led up to the rise of Nazism. This series expresses his aversion to people trying to control other people's thoughts and behavior. So sitting there at home listening to this, you might be thinking, all I want to do is take pictures. I'm not planning on taking on the art world. Why do I need to create themes, sub-themes, structure in my practice of photography? The answer, of course, is that you're right. You don't have to have these things in order to get value out of being a photographer. But if you add depth, you automatically add meaning. There's also a secondary benefit to this. If your work has a very distinctive feel, it's easier to entice the commercial or advertising world to perhaps give you a commission. Here's a few examples of how Olaf has merged his personal vision with advertisements. Olaf has built a whole orchestra of photographs and they all work in harmony. He directs all facets of the shoot and manages to hit that sweet spot between painting and photography. I hope that you enjoyed watching and listening. Please join me next time. I'll put up a link to another of my favorite Dutch photographers, Reinieke Dijkstra. Cheers.